First of all, thank you so much for inviting me and considering AbleChild as a valuable resource for parents. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience and some of my strength and hope for the future. I am a mother of two boys. My son is filming here, is my youngest one. But my oldest one, Joseph, when he was 7, the school wanted me to place him on psychiatric drugs. He started out really excited for school. He was an early talker, and basically when he started to go to school in 2nd grade, I started getting phone calls. Your son isn't behaving, he's getting out of the chair, and it was just repeated complaints. And then they put him on a behavioral chart, and every day he was good, he would get like a little sticker. Well, his whole being changed. He started to get really sad, not looking forward to going to school, and it really was me against the school after a while. They were calling me in, and they told me that he might suffer from attention deficit disorder, ADHD, and I had no idea what it was, and I never heard of it, and quite frankly I was taken back because I wanted to fit in with, I lived in New Canaan, Connecticut. I really wanted to fit in with the other mothers, and I was really taken back by how depressed my son was getting, and how many calls were coming in from the school regarding his behavior. And so anyway, they called me in, and they sat me down and had me fill out a checklist on my son. And then the teacher was going to fill out a checklist, and the school psychologist. And that night I was looking through the checklist, and it was like just a lot of different questions. It's called the Connor rating scale. I had no idea what that was. So I started to fill it out and being enthusiastic, trying to help my son the best I could with the school. And then they had mentioned, they also mentioned that there were a lot of behavioral health drugs that I might consider. And my son was really tiny, and I was like, I don't want to put my son on drugs. And I started to get scared. And the night before my final meeting with the school, I turned on the television. I was flipping through it, and on C-SPAN, I saw a mother testifying before Congress about exactly what I was going through. She was like testifying that the school had asked her to diagnose her son, and based on this diagnosis, she put her son on Paxil. And then after he was on Paxil, she did not even recognize him anymore, and he actually tried to attack her with a knife. And he was, well, my son was 7, and her son Michael was around the same age. And he was, one day she drove by the playground, and she saw her son over in the corner just shuffling and looking down. And so her story was, you know, in front of Congress. I'm just going through the same thing. And the next morning I called Congress and I said, do you have that mother's name? I really want to talk to her. So I called her up. She said, listen, the school tried to do this to me. I'm just telling you that it's a dark road, what they're suggesting, and try to avoid it. Nobody told me that there was no such thing as ADHD, that there was no science behind it, there's no blood tests, there's no brain scans. Nobody can say you have it or you don't. And so I got off the phone with her, and I said, I'll call you after my meeting. And I went into school, and I said to the team that was waiting, I said, I don't believe in attention deficit disorder. And they didn't know what to do with me. They were like, well, this is what we have to offer. And I was like, absolutely not. I went back to the school, and I decided not to label him. And I brought him and my other son to tutoring centers. So, like SCORE Learning Center, I highly recommend going Sylvan Learning Center, Kaplan's, but my children thrived and loved it. And then I took all those reports back to the school and said, well, my son's doing much better here, here, and here. And so that day I met this mother. We decided
the mother that you had called.
Yes.
She lived nearby.
Yep, she lived in Millbrook, New York. Not so close by, but
close enough.
Close enough, and we decided to start an organization called AbleChild, and she was dealing with a lot of legislation on the federal level, and dealing with other mothers that were calling her, and some of the other mothers did not have such a good turnout like I did. One mother put her daughter on drugs, and her daughter had a heart attack and died in her arms. Another mother,
What age was to this?
11, Shayna Dunkel, you could read about her on our website, AbleChild. Another child hung herself, and none of these side effects were ever disclosed to any of the parents, and no other choice was given. Like, it was like, you do this, or you're going to struggle with the school, because I certainly struggled with the school. So Patty and I decided to joined forces when she was telling me about the other mothers, and I started to do my own research about the label, about the drugs, and the other parents. And one of the things I found out about was that a lot of drug companies pay psychologists, and they give out free samples to them.
Yes.
So that's called off-label prescribing. So some of these drugs are not even FDA approved for use in children. So I went up to Hartford, and I started to work on legislation there, and I met some mothers that I will never forget. One of the big pieces that we worked on is I put this handout. It's called the MedWatch, and nobody ever heard of it. Basically, it is a voluntary program that is run by the FDA, and it is a report that you would file if you had an adverse event from a psychiatric drug or any drug. Okay, so then the FDA takes these reports and they compile them and they regulate the drug companies. Okay, this is a powerful consumer tool. The pharmaceutical companies are well aware of this. This is their kryptonite. They do not like this. AbleChild fought to get the 1-800 MedWatch number put on all prescription labels. But in the state of Connecticut, we're the first state in the country to do it. But when I was doing this legislative work, they were saying there wasn't enough room on the label for the 1-800 number. So that was a real battle. So it does now print out on your prescription label that is on the packet. They will not allow it on the container, and if so, it's going to be very, very tiny. So that's a struggle, but this is a really good tool for parents who are using psychiatric drugs or any other kind of drug to be aware of. And they can also call the FDA and get a record of all the MedWatch reports on a specific drug. So they can see, oh, Mary committed suicide on Paxil. Oh, wow, there was this violent act on Paxil. And they might be more informed not to use it or look for an alternative. Orrin Hatch put together a simple letter that you can customize and put in your child's folder at school. And it's called the Hatch Amendment. A lot of schools have no idea what this is. And as a matter of fact, if you're strong enough as a parent, willing to stand up for your child at school, I highly recommend it. Basically, it just says, listen, before you conduct any psychological programs in the classroom, such as value clarifications, there's a lot of new, I would say, psychological programs on sex, on religion, all sorts of things that are coming through the health department that parents might not agree with, and they don't want their child to participate in. And this is a letter that you can customize and put in your child's folder, and then you would be called before your child participates in the activity. And by law, they have to make accommodations for your child to do another activity during that lesson.
So sometimes, and I'm a pediatric OT, and I deal with families all the time that get this pressure, and I'm holistic, so I'm like, there's so many things we can do that don't involve pharmaceuticals to help your child. So I usually take them down that path. But sometimes the schools really pressure them, and I was taking my son to see this one doctor whose son was autistic, and she told me legally they're not allowed to force any child to be medicated. Is that true?
That is true. That is a law that our organization passed. It's the prohibition on mandatory medication. You can find that on our website. It basically is a federal law tied to special education.
Right.
Our organization was critical in getting that passed.
I have a question. Actually, I'm a psychoanalyst in private practice, and I recently took on a case where the issues are very pertinent to what you've been talking about, which is what prompted me to come here tonight. So I was introduced to a 13-year-old girl in one of the local public high school districts, who her parents are divorced and are involved in a messy, hostile fight over custody. She had been diagnosed with ADHD and was on medication, on ADHD medication. I think it was Paxil. Her father, who is a big believer, who I guess has a history of depression and is a big believer of antidepressants, really wanted his daughter to go on antidepressant medication. The mother, who has been talking to me, was very much against it and didn't think that there was a need for her daughter to go on it. So they had a very pointed difference of opinion. The daughter had been seeing a therapist, a clinical social worker, who was more aligned with the father, was selected by the father, who also was pretty insistent that her patient, this 13-year-old, should see a psychiatrist and be on antidepressant medication in addition to the ADHD medication. What piqued my interest was, when I first heard about this, was that they had read both the father and the therapist, and to some extent the school psychologist had threatened to report the mother to the Westchester Child Health Services if she continued to resist taking her daughter to a psychiatrist and putting her on antidepressant medication. That seemed to me really overreaching, and so that's when I decided to take on the case. And so I had a couple of sessions with the mother, with this daughter and the mother, just to as preliminary. And when I first got involved, the mother was already feeling so much pressure, from her estranged ex-spouse, from her daughter's therapist, from the school psychologist, that she didn't really know what to do or what her rights were. And she, under pressure, she went and had an initial consultation with the local psychiatrist, who, after the initial consultation, said it's not clear that girl needs to be on, to go on antidepressant medication. Why don't we hold off and let me see her a little bit, some more before I come to any kind of preliminary conclusion. So it just seemed to me like such an extreme situation where, the fighting between the two ex-spouses, that, is common. I understand that. But the fact that the therapist, who was not a psychiatrist but was a clinical social worker, was also so insistent, as well as the school psychologist who called me when they heard that I had been brought into the situation. So I just wanted, I thought that was a very interesting situation, and I wanted to see what your sort of thoughts were on that, based on what I just described.
Very common.
Very
common.
That Child Protective Services would take a child away?
Medical neglect.
And
Because
that's what the mother was afraid
Because they're
of.
not putting they were threatening her because she wasn't going to put her on psychiatric meds?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they do that for
I
chemo,
thought
don't
For
they?
cancer, if your child has cancer, you don't give them.
But this is
They'll take your kid away.
Well, see, this is
psychiatric.
yeah. See,
Yeah,
it's
it's the same system.
The same
You see it
thing.
as a neglect
Yes.
of anyway, I want to hear what you respond to him.
well, and I
For the school.
hope you would agree. I shouldn't say hope you agree. Maybe you will agree that psychiatric evaluations and diagnosis are different from physical ones because they're subjective.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so what's happening is they're trying to align it with a physical, like it's a physical abnormality versus a subjective look, and that's why when you do talk therapy, it's much healthier to do talk therapy than it is to give somebody a medication to correct behavior. So I see it commonly. Parents come to my organization and they say the state is, CPS has got involved because I refuse to do this. So it is very common. I give you a lot of credit for getting involved. There needs to be more advocates that are trained and understand what informed consent means and willing to stand up for it. When two parents have legal custody, if one of the parents disagrees, it shouldn't go forward because it's not a physical, it's not cancer. And there's more evidence that shows that the medication is more dangerous, and plus it's not FDA approved for use in children. A 16-year-old is a child, so that is off-label prescribing. So, my angle would be going in there and saying, wait a minute, can we have the MedWatch reports on Paxil? And what is the informed consent age you're considering? Because the black box warning says that it's not approved for use of children under 25. I think that's what it says. When I was before the FDA, we thought it was kind of funny how it could just trigger at a certain age. But that's my approach, would be to start showing them evidence, have them explain to you, are you off-label prescribing this? And what kind of protections are you going to give to the mother if there's an adverse event such as suicide? Or, how are you going to prevent that? Because that's a known side effect. So, I really am so glad to hear that there's somebody in your industry that's willing to take on such a case. I mean, that gives me a great amount of hope. I just think a 16-year-old girl to be placed on 2 mind-altering drugs.
She's 13.
Oh, 13, that's even worse. Nowadays, everybody's on psychiatric drugs. You're going to be targeted if you say no to psychiatric drugs. You're the one who's being targeted. If you say, I don't want to do this, you're the one that's the outcast.